Israel mounts its biggest military crackdown in 20 years. Petrol prices go up and there's more to come. Jailed for life, the men who killed for a Rolex watch. And the end of a dream for Cheltenham's favourite champion.
The ITV News at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
Good evening. Israel's biggest military operation for 20 years has left 31 Palestinians dead in a single day. 150 tanks and 20,000 troops went into the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, occupying refugee camps and taking control of the Palestinians' main West Bank city, Ramallah, where Yasser Arafat has his headquarters. That prompted 2 Palestinian gun attacks that left 7 Israelis dead. Israeli forces sealed off Ramallah as they moved in. Our Middle East correspondent John Irvine got round their checkpoints for this eyewitness report from inside the town.
The Israelis have taken charge in Ramallah. It is a Palestinian town under curfew, where outside has become out of bounds to the 100,000 residents. The streets are now the domain of the Israeli army and the militiamen they came to take on. Although the Israelis declared Ramallah a closed military zone and denied access to journalists, we managed to find a way through the blockade to witness the fiercest of West Bank gun battles. The Israeli army has effectively invaded this part of Ramallah. Here you can see 2 tanks, 3 armoured personnel carriers. They have cut off this part of the town. The Israeli army are taking on the Palestinian militias in their own backyard. It has been the biggest Israeli military operation for almost 20 years. The first of the Israeli tanks went into Ramallah just before dawn. This is a Palestinian stronghold, and dozens of gunmen came out to meet them. This is the view through an American camera about to be smashed to pieces by bullets. One bullet went through the centre of the lens. Amazingly, the cameraman was not hurt. This morning, some Israeli soldiers were resting in the Palestinian homes they'd taken over. Living rooms became billets, even command centres for officers controlling this operation. Houses that happened to have strategic value were commandeered by snipers. Outside, Israeli infantrymen spent little time out in the open, and for good reason. The Israelis made several loudspeaker announcements asking men aged between 16 and 40 to come out with their hands up. We saw a few takers, and inevitably, the gun battle resumed. Here, 2 young Palestinian boys wave at an Israeli tank before turning and walking away. Seconds later, just out of vision on the left, it was one of the children who threw the grenade. As we were leaving Ramallah, the battle still raged. But outnumbered and outgunned, this was a fight the Palestinians were losing. John Irvine, ITV News, Ramallah.
Today's Palestinian reprisal attacks were on unsuspecting Israeli motorists. In one of them, on the Lebanese border, the gunmen were disguised as Israeli soldiers. That attack followed the heaviest battle of the last 24 hours in a refugee camp just north of Gaza City. It began when 20 Israeli tanks rolled in. From Jerusalem, Juliet Bremner reports.
The Israeli search for Palestinian militants and their weapons moves relentlessly on. Last night, the people of Gaza's Jabalia camp felt its full force. The troops were looking for factories where they believe missiles are made. In their wake, they left nearly 20 dead. Israel makes no apology for the devastation caused to this, the biggest refugee camp in Gaza and home to 100,000 people. But the Palestinians call it a massacre and chant for revenge. They are tired of burying their dead in such overwhelming numbers and want to even the score. These Israeli civilians paid the price. 6 were killed and a further 7 injured when their cars were ambushed as they drove along a quiet road. The gunmen disguised themselves as Israeli army officers and hid in the undergrowth. A massive search was launched around the area close to the border with Lebanon. 2 gunmen were found and killed. Before today's attack, this part of the country had been peaceful. Now they too are fearful and wondering how many more lives will be lost. Faced with this kind of indiscriminate slaughter, the Israelis say they have no choice but to intensify their military crackdown, more determined than ever to offer no concessions. Juliet Bremner, ITV News, Jerusalem.
Here, the cost of petrol went up again today by at least a penny a litre. Fuel companies blame a New Year rise in the price of crude oil. Experts say this could be the start of more increases to come. Here's our consumer editor, Chris Choi.
Up and very possibly up again. That's tonight's bad news on petrol. Increases rippled across Britain's forecourts today, taking the average unleaded price per litre over the 70p mark. The industry described it as a significant psychological benchmark, and drivers were warned it's just the start of a trend which the trade says is overdue.
70 pence per litre, 10 pence increment, is actually quite an emotional barrier. Prices came down to allow the pump price to be below, and they've stayed below 70 pence for a little longer than perhaps they should have done.
So just where is that pressure on petrol prices coming from tonight? Oil production has been restricted since Christmas. That's already put around 1p on the price of a litre of unleaded. Rising tensions between the USA and Iraq means fears of disruption to supply could add a further 2p. And the oil producers organisation, OPEC's future oil restrictions are likely to add a further 3p within a fortnight. That could mean pump prices reach 75p a litre. Like millions more, Amanda Weems, a mother of 4, says rises will punch a hole through tight household budgets.
I mean, it's not going to stop me using the car. As I say, I don't have any choice, so I'll have to pay the extra money. And then we'll just have to budget somewhere else to cover it.
Many forecourts like this that haven't increased prices so far plan to do so at midnight, so you haven't got long to beat the latest rises. They're nothing like a peak. 2 years ago, we were paying 85p a litre, but they are a painful reminder of how global pressures can hit UK drivers. Chris Choi, ITV News, Central London.
Early results in the presidential elections in Zimbabwe tonight put President Mugabe in the lead. But those observers who were allowed to stay to monitor the voting said today the elections were flawed at every stage of the process. Our Africa correspondent Tim Ewart is one of the few television journalists reporting from inside Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe's ballot boxes appeared to contain a comfortable victory for Robert Mugabe tonight. The votes are still being counted, but early results suggest a huge majority for the president in rural areas portrayed as his stronghold. State television's election special is a leaden affair, duly recording what many here regard as an inevitable result.
Mugabe Robert Gabriel, ZANU-PF, 21,436 votes.